Presentation 6. This training curriculum is based on the Registered Behavior Technician task list and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the RBT credential. This program is offered independent of the BACB. This presentation, we're going to talk about self-help skills and chaining. What is a chain? A chain consists of a string of very basic small behaviors that, when added together, create a complicated routine when combined. So why use a chain? A chain allows us to teach complex skills that allow the individual to be more independent. And we can add new behaviors or skills to a person's repertoire. Remember, we're not just looking at one single behavior here, one single response. We are looking at a more complex skill, so things such as like brushing your teeth or folding clothes. The general steps of a chain, or designing a chain. As a behavior analyst, I look to see if the skill to be taught requires several steps. If it does, a chain can be used. The skill is broken down into several smaller steps. This is called a task analysis, which is a task that has been broken up into numbered steps. Once we have a task analysis, we're going to individually link those chains, or link the skills, and this creates the chain. A chain is used to build a complicated routine from simple steps, to teach self-help skills, and to increase independence. Several simple tasks that link together to form a more complex task is known as a chain. Almost anything we do can be considered part of a behavior chain. Tying your shoes can be taught by a series of separate acts, beginning with holding the laces in your hand, then pulling them, crossing them, turning them, and so on. Or, like in this example, making a sandwich. Think about all the steps that go into making a sandwich, all the individual little behaviors. A vocabulary word that you should know in applied behavior analysis is task analysis. A task analysis is when we break a task down into multiple steps. Again, a task analysis is when we break down a task into multiple steps. So, if you think about something that you do every day, try to break that down into as simple as steps and number them. Basically, think about this. If you do something and you want to have someone else do that same thing that you do, and you make a list for them, and you number that list. Well, first you do this, then you do this, and then you do this. That is basically making a task analysis. It is important that we know how to make a task analysis first before we do a chain, because we have to break it down into steps first. Now, I want to preface this by saying, as an RBT, it is not your job. It is not your job to come up with the chain or to write the task analysis, but rather to implement it. But this is just giving you some background information on how it's done. There are several programs that you will be doing that may involve chaining. Some things such as hand washing, brushing teeth, putting your socks on, putting your shirt on, Pants on, shoe tying, jacket on, washing face, making bed, restroom, going to the restroom. These are all things that a person may do or a patient may have as a program that may involve chaining. In order for chaining to work, the steps have to be practiced in the same specific order every time. Reinforcement should only be given once the entire task is complete. And steps that are mastered, so a step that's mastered is called a maintenance step. And the target step that we're currently teaching is called the acquisition step. Chains in ABC. The completion of one step serves as an SD to complete the next step. The reinforcement for each step is the completion of that step. So it looks something like this. You have the SD, the behavior, then the reinforcement. So basically the step itself, the completion of it, should act as a reinforcer to go to the next step. Each task signals that the next task should start. So in this example, the wastebasket is full. It should be emptied. That's the SD, seeing the full wastebasket. Seeing the full wastebasket, seeing that it's full, is the SD for the person to pick up the wastebasket, which itself is an SD to take it to a bigger garbage can. Once you get to the bigger garbage can, that's an SD for taking the lid off, which then serves as an SD to pick up the smaller wastebasket and put it into the garbage can, which then serves as an SD to put the lid back on. Therefore, in a chain, the completion of one task is an SD for the next task to begin. This is why it is so important to wait until the end of a task when teaching this for the completion of the whole task to reinforce. You don't want to reinforce each single step. You want instead for the actual completion of it to serve as a reinforcement and the SD for the next step. So why use chaining? Chaining is used to teach a skill that requires several steps, meaning it is not just one response or behavior. For example, if I tell my son to brush his teeth, there are several steps involved. It is not just one response. The steps should have a set order, and each step can be taught individually to mastery. It allows the learner to be successful. When used correctly, chaining will allow the learner to complete the task and eventually be able to do it on their own. Remember, in chaining, we are taking each individual step and linking them together into a chain. This will allow us to teach skills that require several steps. Step 1 in creating a chain is to make a task analysis. A task analysis is when you break down the task into simple, smaller steps. So, here's an example one for scooping ice cream. Please note that this is oversimplified for illustration purposes, and a real one would likely include steps such as putting the ice cream back in the freezer, etc. But for our purposes here, we'll make a 4-step task analysis. 1. Open the ice cream. 2. Pick up a scoop. 3. Scoop 1 scoop of ice cream. And 4. Put scoop of ice cream in bowl. This task analysis, while oversimplified, is 4 steps. We will be using this to illustrate 3 types of chaining. There are 3 types of chaining: forward chain, backward chaining, and total task. The acquisition step. The acquisition step is the step you will be teaching. You will likely need to help them through it a few times before they are able to do it. Remember, we start out with the least intrusive prompt possible and move on from there. Remember, it goes gestural or model as far as prompting, partial physical, and then full physical. And remember, we're not talking. We're not giving any kind of verbal prompts. We want the step, the completion of the step, to act as the prompt for the next, or the SD for the next step. So we're not going to be talking during this. The only talking we are going to do during all this is the initial instruction. Some chaining considerations. The initial SD or instruction is always given at the beginning of the task. Let's scoop ice cream, for example. Do not verbally prompt between each step. And that's for forward and backward chaining. Remember that each step should be an SD for the next step, and reinforcement is given at the end. One of the nice things I like about chaining is that a lot of these chains have natural reinforcement built in at the end. For example, when the person finishes scooping their ice cream, now they can eat ice cream. Or if a person does a chain for putting their shoes on, they now get to go outside. In forward chaining, you teach the chain beginning with the first step. The learner completes the first step or acquisition step with the RBT, prompting them through it. Right? As the RBT, you're going to use the minimal prompt to help them with that acquisition step. Once that first step is complete with that minimal prompting, the RBT will then fully physically prompt the learner through each of the successive steps. Once that first step is mastered, the first step becomes a maintenance step, and the second step becomes the acquisition step. So then the learner must complete step 1, and then acquisition step 2, and then the RBT fully physically prompts step 3 and 4, and so forth. Reinforcement is only given when the whole task is complete. Now, the research is still out on what type of task or what type of chaining works best for what individuals. As an RBT, your job is to implement the chain, not to design them. The design of the chains and the task analysis, that is the role of the behavior analyst. So as an RBT, your job is to implement them, not to design them. So here's an example of scooping ice cream with forward chaining. So the RBT would deliver the SD, let's scoop some ice cream. You would help the learner through step 1 using the minimal prompt. That's the acquisition step. After that step, you would fully physically prompt the learner through step 2, 3, and 4. Then you would say, "Yay, you scooped the ice cream." Once the learner or patient mastered step 1, step 2 becomes the acquisition step, and step 1 is a maintenance step. So the SD remains the same. Let's scoop some ice cream. So then the learner does step 1, and then the RBT, with minimal prompting, helps them through step 2, the acquisition steps, and then fully physically prompts 3 and 4, and then gives reinforcement. "Yay, you scooped the ice cream." So as you can see, we are moving forward through the chain. We're going 1, 2, 3, and 4. That is why this is known as forward chaining. Once step 2 is mastered, we move on to step 3. The SD remains the same. Let's scoop some ice cream. Now the learner does 1 and 2. And step 3 is the acquisition step that the RBT does minimal prompting through. And then step 4, the RBT prompts the learner through it, and reinforcement is delivered. And finally, step 4. Once step 3 is mastered, step 4 becomes the acquisition step. So the learner does all 3 steps by themselves, and the RBT minimally prompts them through step 4 until mastery. So, the SD, let's scoop some ice cream, should now be the instruction for that person to be able to do it independently. Because once the last step is mastered, the chain is said to be mastered. As you can see, we went 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that is why this is known as forward chaining. In backwards chaining, the RBT prompts the learner through all the steps, and the last step is the acquisition step. When teaching chains using backwards chaining, the last step of the chain is taught first. Once the last step is mastered by the learner, it becomes a maintenance step, and the second step is now the acquisition step, and so forth. This allows the learner to be immediately successful, because the task is done once they do the last step. Then we reinforce when the task is complete. So here's a backward chaining example with the ice cream. The SD is let's scoop some ice cream. Step 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3. The RBT will prompt the learner through it. So the RBT will prompt the learner through opening the ice cream, picking up the scoop, and scooping one scoop. They'll fully physically prompt those steps. Step 4 is where you minimally prompt, where you are teaching the acquisition step. And then once that step is complete, yay, you scoop the ice cream. Then, once that step is mastered, we move back to step 3 now. See, we're going backwards. 4, 3, 2, 1. That's why this is known as backwards chaining. The SD remains the same. Let's scoop some ice cream. So the RBT prompts the learner through step 1 and 2, and then helps them with step 3, the minimal prompting. They're teaching step 3, and then the learner can do step 4 on their own with the maintenance step, and the reinforcement is delivered. Yay! You scoop the ice cream. So once step 3 is mastered, we move to step 2. SD remains the same. Let's scoop some ice cream. The RBT fully physically prompts the learner through step 1, teaches step 2 in the acquisition step with the minimal prompting, and allows the learner to do step 3 and 4 on their own because those are maintenance steps. And then the reinforcement is delivered. Yay, you scoop the ice cream. And that moves us on to step 1 being the acquisition step, where the learner is helped by the RBT with minimal prompting and allowed to do the rest of the steps. Now once that last step is mastered, or step number 1, the chain is said to be mastered, and the individual can now scoop their own ice cream. Now total task chaining is a variation of forward chaining, but don't get them too confused. Total task chaining is when you teach the complete behavior chain one after another. The RBT would walk the learner through each step. Different than the other two, you give supplemental reinforcers such as social good job or something like that after each step. This can be a bit too complex for early learners, but research is still out on which of these ones actually works best for whom. So in total task chaining, we would say, let's get some ice cream. We would open the ice cream, would be like a target step. Awesome, okay, now we pick up the scoop. They pick up the scoop. Good job, now we scoop one scoop. So we're basically telling them what to do throughout the whole thing. And so forth and so forth. For some early learners, this could be confusing or too complex and could lead to that prompt dependency. But again, that's going to depend on the learner. We do not use total task analysis or total task chaining very much. I will typically use it on skills that really you can't stop in the middle, such as going to the bathroom. We really couldn't use backwards chaining or forward chaining on going to the bathroom, right? Because they have to complete it each time. So I may use a total task chain for going to the bathroom, where I say, okay, first we pull our pants down. Second, we sit down on the toilet. Okay, awesome. Now we go to the bathroom. Yay. All right, now we're done. Now we flush. Yay, and so forth and so forth. So, prompting during chains. When teaching backwards chains or forward chains at Learning Arts, you will fully prompt. That means hand over hand that child or the patient through each step leading up to the acquisition step. When you get to the acquisition step, you will let go of the child or patient and see if they complete the step independently. If the learner, patient does not complete that step independently, you will use the least intrusive prompt. If the child does not complete the acquisition step independently, you will use the least intrusive prompt. Remember, that goes gestural or model, partial physical, full physical. And remember, no talking. We want each step to be the SD for the next step itself. Okay, so let's do an example of backwards chaining with emptying a wastebasket into a trash bin. So, we're going to fully prompt taking the full basket to the bin. We're going to fully prompt removing the bin lid. We're going to fully prompt emptying the basket. And we're going to fully prompt replacing the bin lid. The last step, since we're doing backwards chaining, is the acquisition step. Here, we're going to reduce to minimal prompting, where the learner takes the basket back to where it belongs. We're going to keep reducing that prompt until the learner is independently successful. So again, this is very similar to what we talked about earlier in regard to chaining. Here at Learning Arts, we are going to fully prompt the individual through each of the steps, and then reduce to minimal prompting on the acquisition step. We're basically teaching them, right? We're teaching that last step. And as we go through the backward chain, we would fully prompt taking the full basket to the bin. We would fully prompt removing the bin lid, fully prompt emptying the basket, and now we're going to do step 3, or step 4 rather, reduce to minimal prompting, is replacing the bin lid, and we're going to keep reducing that prompt until the person is independently successful, and the child will take the basket back to where it belongs. And they will also replace the lid with help from the RBT. So what if a maintenance step needs prompting again? What if the learner wasn't as skillful as we thought, or did not master it as well as we had hoped? Well, we're going to make a note of that, and at Learning Arts, if it happens over 2 consecutive sessions where the person cannot do that step, the acquisition step will reset to be whatever that unmaintained step is. Let's do one more task analysis. So a task analysis for drawing a happy face. Step 1, draw a circle. Step 2, draw the mouth. Step 3, draw one eye. Step 4, draw the other eye. In a forward chain, the RBT would partially prompt the first step, or teach the first step. That's our teaching step. That's what you're going to be teaching. Remember, it's called an acquisition step. Then you're going to fully prompt each successive step. Once that first step is mastered, it becomes a maintenance step. And step 2 becomes the acquisition step, and so on. So in a forward chain, the RBT in step 1 would teach the individual how to draw the circle. Then in step 2, they would fully prompt drawing the mouth, Step 3, they would fully prompt drawing one eye. And step 4, they would fully prompt drawing the other eye. Once the learner had mastered step 1, that becomes the maintenance step, remember? So the learner would do step 1 on their own, and the RBT would train step 2, in this case drawing the mouth, and then fully prompt drawing both eyes. Step 3 and 4, and so forth. Remember, reinforcement only comes at the end. And remember, the instruction occurs at the beginning. So in this case, we would hand the piece of paper and a pen to the learner, and we would say, draw a happy face, and go through the chain. Once the happy face was complete, and only once it's complete, will we say, hey, good job drawing that happy face. Remember, we're not going to be verbally prompting in between steps. We want each step to be an SD for the next step. Now, if it was a backward chain, the RBT would partially prompt the last step after fully prompting steps 1 through 3. So remember, the RBT would fully prompt step 1, step 2, and step 3, and then help teach step 4, partially prompt, whatever the minimal prompt would be. Once that last step is mastered, it becomes the maintenance step, and step 3 becomes the acquisition step. So the RBT would fully physically prompt drawing the circle, fully physically draw the mouth, and then teach step 3, partially prompt step 3, drawing the one eye, and the individual should be able to draw the other eye on their own. So, in this case, the RBT would have fully physically prompted drawing the circle, the mouth, and the one eye, and then taught them to draw the other eye through minimal prompting. Once that second eye was complete, we would give reinforcement. Awesome job drawing that happy face. Remember, we are not verbally prompting between steps, and we are giving the SD at the beginning. So it might look something like this, or sound something like this. We would say, draw a happy face, and the RBT would fully physically prompt step 1, 2, and 3, and then partially prompt, or minimally prompt, step 4, drawing that second eye.